Let's talk about another late 70s trend, which was the emergence of contemporary jazz that was spearheaded by artists like Chuck Mangione and George Benson, who found themselves being criticized by jazz purists for their commercial success because apparently it's artistically honorable to be broke all the time. George Benson, I mean, that This Masquerade in Breezin', that made an impression on me, as an 8th grade kid. It was beautiful music. It was something I could grab onto, and it was kind of like, a gateway into jazz, I would say. So I'm glad he did it.
Yeah, well, I think on that basis alone, you have to talk about it in terms of being a good thing. I mean, how many kids picked up a flugelhorn or a trumpet for the first time because of Chuck, or started playing something other than rock guitar because they heard a George Benson record? I mean, it's sort of the argument that people used to make for Steely Dan, which is, if Steely Dan does an interview and says they're influenced by Bill Evans or John Coltrane, maybe their fans go and check that out, and that's an end in itself.
He mentions Dave Brubeck in New Frontier, and I saw somebody indicate, I discovered Dave Brubeck because of that song. So exactly what you just said. Yeah,
people get curious, and that's great, and they understand. It's a way of drawing attention to the fact that the DNA of that music goes back a lot further than last week, and the fact that at the time people were bitching about those guys having success, in the pop realm is just so misguided. I mean, all of a sudden Joe Zawinul is a loser because Birdland is getting played on the radio. Give me a break.
Yeah, that's
ridiculous. Get your priorities together.
Well, Steely Dan Parker's Band, who references Charlie Parker, and East St. Louis Toulouse, an actual Duke Ellington composition. As far as Weather Report, they weren't releasing pop hits, of course, but it's important to remember that artists like Weather Report, the Crusaders, Jeff Beck, Jean-Luc Ponty, they were doing some great cutting-edge stuff in the 70s. It wasn't hitting the charts, but it's unfair to say, the 60s were golden, the 70s was disco. Because, you had the prog rockers. You had Yes, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Jethro Tull, all in their prime.
Genesis.
And I knew a lot of people back then who had no problem saying they liked songs by Deep Purple, Casey and the Sunshine Band, and John Denver. I mean, there was less pressure to be inclined to only like one particular style of music. It was a freer time in that regard. The radio stations played a true variety. They might play a silly novelty song and then play, some of the things. They might play Annie's song and then play, That's the Way I Like It.
Right, and it sounds now like you're exaggerating, but you could hear Olivia Newton-John followed by Slade. That's just par for the course. This is popular music. We're not painting it with any particular brush.
Yeah, well, the expectation was, like you said, within one band, you could have Color My World and 25 or 6 to 4 in the same set,
Right, which is that was sort of a hangover of the Beatles, because they just, they wore their eclecticism and their variety as a badge of honor, and they would just, you'd have, listen to the White Album. There's about 15 styles of music on that record.
Yeah,
that was okay, and it like I said, it hadn't gotten to where it was a science yet, and you had an A&R guy saying, well, you can do this and you can't do that, and you have to be very specific, and this is what you do, and you should only do that.
But of course, as relatively open as the 70s might have been, it certainly wasn't completely open, as evidenced by the Sugarloaf, Don't Call Us, We'll Call You. Not everybody was getting in the door. There was still some rejection.
I always found that one fascinating, as especially as a young musician. By that time, I was playing drums and keyboards and had been in a couple of bands, in my young high school years. And I thought, well, Sugarloaf had a big hit with Green Eyed Lady. And this is the band that's singing about how they can't get anyone on the phone and no one will take them seriously and no one will take their call. Yipes.
Right. Maybe it was a flashback to their experience before they got their hit.
Yeah.
That goes back to those Casey Kasem stories, like when they had, Love Roller Coaster and everybody thought you heard somebody being murdered in the studio. That was the sound of people riding a roller coaster. Don't Call Us, We'll Call You was the thing about, they said that the phone number being dialed was the White House, and they actually called the White House during the recording of the song. But as I listened to the keypad, I think it was chosen by the rhythm of the numbers. I think that one's BS.
Yeah, and aren't the last four numbers, I'm picturing that in my head right now, aren't the last four numbers the same pitch? The phone number of the White House, are the last four numbers the same? I don't think so.
Yeah, it's one of those urban legends they try and toss out there to make it more interesting.
Well, and the thing about the some woman's getting killed during the Ohio Players record, I thought, well, that's a really badly insulated studio if you can hear.
Well, that just goes to show how people don't think in terms of the logistics of making a recording. You know, people aren't just going to wander in, kill someone, and people don't even hit pause or, you know, they can just record it.
Right,
you know?
exactly, yeah.
Oh.
What was that scream? Never mind, keep playing.
Hey, great drum fill. I think someone just died over there, but hey, never mind. Great guitar part. Yeah, it's crazy. But, you know, that's how it goes. I want to mention that the appendix in both books has a lot of interesting statistics and tables, you know, with Grammy nominations, movie soundtrack ratings, etc. You know, it's interesting just to browse through that and just see the data. As I said, you know, I'm so familiar with all this. It's not like I know 25% of it. You know, I know like 90% of it. So in my case, some of the stuff I didn't know, I'll go back and find out just to see what I missed. And so if you guys consider giving the 80s a similar treatment, or are you kind of done with this?
Well, you know, we did think about it, but we were, you know, especially at the time, we were kind of avowed 80s haters. You know, not anyone in particular. I mean, we were big Police fans and Prince fans, and of course, you know, there was great stuff going on then. But just kind of the way the mainstream went, the way pop radio went.
Yeah.
In the 80s.
Well, MTV.
Was a bit disheartening. I actually thought about pitching a book called 100 Hits from the 80s That Didn't Suck.
But are there? Yeah.
But I thought, would I have any fun writing that? And I thought, if anyone's you know, came of age in the 80s, that's not necessarily the perspective they want to read. They want to read, weren't the 80s great?
Well, you know, I was pointing to Sade. You know, that was great music. That was 80s. And, you know, Donald Fagen, Nightfly was 80s. Stevie Wonder did some good stuff. But then again, not as good as his 70s. But, you know, if you go looking for it in any decade, there's good and bad stuff. But, yeah, if you love the 70s, you might want to spend the time to write a book about it. If you don't love the 90s or the 30s, why make the effort? So I'm not surprised to hear you say that you considered it and rejected it. Somebody asked me, do you want to do a cover band where the music has to be all 60s? I'd say, yeah. Do you want to do a cover band where the music is all 70s? I'd say, yeah. 50s, I might do. 40s, you know, if I was in a big band, I'd do. But pretty much any other decade, I'd pass, you know.
Right. I thought it was very telling that, you know, back when radio was splintering into all these oldies formats, the one that didn't really take was all 80s. You know, they tried it in a bunch of major markets. You know, people were switching, and they thought, well, this is the demographic we want. We want people who are still young but have some money now and they're out of college or whatever. And they did all 80s, and they tried it. It just didn't take. What do you glean from that? That means even the people who were there at the time don't want to hear that music again.
Yeah, they're trying to forget it. They don't want to be reminded of those particular songs, you know.
Yeah. Well, not en masse anyway. I mean, I can certainly, you know, you love whatever was happening when you were young. So, like I said, you can't kind of argue people out of what they like.
Well, my main two problems with the 80s music is, number one, there was that whole drum machine thing where live drummers were sort of given a backseat to this sort of, you know, obvious, you know, the snare drum on Madonna songs sounded like a crate being dropped in a warehouse, you know, just wasn't my thing. And then a lot of white noise synthesizers, you know. My point is, even if I liked a song, the production was often that sort of keyboard sound and drum sound that was a turnoff to me. So even if I liked, you know, like Thomas Dolby, So You Blinded Me with Science, he used that kind of stuff pretty well. I mean, synthesizers and drum machines.
Absolutely. I'm a big Thomas Dolby guy. I think he was a great writer. But still, I have to say I don't listen to his stuff much these days.
Yeah, it's dated.
As great as, you know, Through the Airwaves, and there were some great songs kind of marooned in all the synth traffic on those records, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I think we just put our finger on it, is that the 80s sound dated because of the gear and the technology, whereas the 70s, hey, you know, if I was a kid and I heard Stairway to Heaven for the first time, or, you know, even Ohio Players' Fire or something, I'd be grooving to it. I wouldn't be going, oh, what's that funny drum sound? Or
Right, yeah, because people are still using Les Pauls and Stratocasters and Wurlitzer electric pianos and B3s. Those things actually aren't dated. But if you hear a record from the 80s and go, oh, is that an emulator or an ARP Odyssey? It doesn't travel well through the decades.
Yeah, and there was that whole thing with the music video generation where it started to become more important, the visual presentation. I mean, there was still music in a Duran Duran video. But, you know, for example, Walk Like an Egyptian, if you just hear that song by itself, you're like, what do you mean, Walk Like an Egyptian? What is that about? Oh, well, you have to see the video. You know, it's like Does the song support the video, or does the video support the song?
Well, that's when the tail is wagging the dog.
Right, that became a problem.
I mean, and there was this misguided idea going around at the time that music was sort of perfectible, that we were just on the verge of being able to have everything be mathematically perfect. And then just when they kind of got to the point where everyone was doing that, everyone realized, oh, well, it turns out mathematically perfect has no feel or soul or memorability, so maybe imperfect was kind of cool.
Well, I'm going to tell you something, man. It wasn't that long ago, maybe just last year. Probably was the Grammys. You mentioned Nile Rodgers. Who's the European band that had the big dance hit?
Daft Punk.
Daft Punk. That evening, Stevie Wonder came out, and my favorite moment of the night was when his voice cracked. It was a mistake, but it was human. It was like, I knew he wasn't lip syncing. I knew it wasn't all canned and planned. He kind of croaked. His voices, vocal cords croaked a little bit, and I loved that. I thought, oh, there's a human being on the stage. Killer.
Right, and just for that moment, you were sure that you weren't hearing tracks someone wasn't sort of doing everything off a click track and half of the album being played back in their in-ear monitors.
Yeah, well, Jeff Berlin commented when he was here, I don't remember if it made it to air or not, there was actually more live music at the Oscars than there was at the Grammys. And I think he's right.
Wow, that's interesting. I mean, there was definitely a line in the sand with the Grammys where they kind of embraced the let's blow things up and have 100 dancers on every song thing. And, there was, it kind of, even into the 90s and the early 2000s, it'd be like you'd see Herbie Hancock on there performing, you'd see Henley or, kind of people from the old guard, and then eventually it was like, well, we want to cut down on the number of trophies we present in the telecast, and we just want it to be, today's top 40, and we'll do as many digital splashy things that we can possibly do, just so it just becomes a spectacle. Mm-hmm. Whereas it used to be kind of a bastion of music, You think even the year that the Thriller was nominated for everything at the Grammys, I think the Night Fly had 5 nominations or something that year. It's, where is that kind of thinking?
If you think about it, recorded music doesn't really have that long of a history. It was a turn of the previous century kind of thing, and likewise film. So it's the type of thing where you can study it and kind of learn, I won't say all of it, but a chunk of it. And one thing that's encouraging is younger generations. If you go to Target right now, there's Pink Floyd t-shirts, there's Beatles t-shirts. It's kind of like their classical music in a sense. They're kind of rejecting some of the more disposable stuff. And of course, every generation wants to establish their own identity. I get that. If your parents like Black Sabbath, you don't want to like Black Sabbath. If your parents like, Perry Como, you don't want to like Perry Como. But how can you hear Jimi Hendrix or James Brown or Mozart or whatever? It doesn't really matter when it originated. Greatness is greatness.
Right. Greatness is greatness, and authenticity is authenticity, and it always outlives its era. And, I'm not trying to say that there's nothing great going on now. I just feel like the mechanism that used to dispense it to people on a mass scale has just abandoned it, and now it's the responsibility of kind of the end user to go out and beat the bushes and find what they like, because no one's going to alert them to it through a television or a radio.
Yes, but the Friends of Dan Music podcast will alert them to it. This is our mission statement.
Damn right. You are fighting the good fight, my friend.
Well, myself and many others. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are podcasters, and basically the criteria is passion. You have to have a passion or your podcast just dies out. You lose interest in doing it. The audience loses interest in hearing it. So, the people that I'm friends with are the ones that are still standing, and a lot of them are music podcasters. Obvious example, Rick Such and Eddie Cabello.
Yeah,
Inside
absolutely. My buddies.
That's right.
At IMC. And, the thing that you have to hang on to is just be a music fan. Be a music fan for life. Don't get blasé about things. I actually know musicians who aren't looking for the next thing that they'll like, who don't have music collections, who don't have anything in their iTunes except what they had to learn for their last gig. I think that's a bad sign. I think you should always be, nourished by music new and old, and be, out there hunting for the next thing.
I've got an analogy to that with the Beatles, because they used to actually listen to the charts, and they'd hear for example, Whiter Shade of Pale, and they'd come up with A Day in the Life, or Paul McCartney would hear Daydream and come up with Good Day Sunshine. In other words, they were trying to hear what other people were doing and top that or be influenced by it. Then they reached a point where they weren't doing that anymore, and I can't remember if it was George, Ringo, John. Somebody said when they noticed they weren't doing that anymore, they knew that the end was imminent because they didn't have the passion anymore, and, it was running its course. And that was the actual criteria that Beatle specified. I knew we weren't listening to the other stuff anymore and taking an active role in the scene, and then there you go.
Right, they were kind of off in the bubble, and there's also that famous story of I think McCartney and maybe Lennon too hearing an acetate of the Beach Boys' Smile and saying, "Okay, well these guys have raised the bar, let's chase that now."
Oh yeah,
that's a healthy thing. Competition is good.
Now what they say is that Pet Sounds was an answer to Rubber Soul, and Sgt. Pepper was an answer to Pet Sounds. And I heard that Brian Wilson, he was driving in his car, he heard Strawberry Fields Forever come on the radio. He pulled over to the side of the road and kind of cried because he said, "Oh, they got there first."
Right.
So in his mind, he was working towards Strawberry Fields. They did it, and he's like, "Oh man," he's like upset.
Yeah, that's the spirit.
Well, we've spoken quite a bit here. I should mention that in addition to the two books we've discussed today, you've also written one by yourself about the classic Steely Dan album, Asia. Again, that's too big a topic to shoehorn into another episode. So we're going to tackle that on a future podcast, most likely early next year. So it's website time, and I know these books are available at Amazon in Kindle form because that's how I got them. But do you have any preferred method to recommend to listeners who are interested in acquiring them?
Well, actually, the two 70s books, Precious and Few and Night Moves, just came out in the Kindle edition. So if you have that device, that's actually the best way to experience them now. They're both technically in print. I have heard from people that it's harder to find the second one, Night Moves, than it is to find the first one. But you should definitely start with Barnes & Noble and Amazon online. And if you have any trouble finding anything there, they're out there. They're on eBay,
I had no trouble getting them. They're there. And of course, let's not forget about the awesome new Brass Transit CD. Everybody needs to track that down as well.
Yeah, the best. We're not doing digital on that right now because basically it's designed for venue sales at our shows. But we put it up. We put hard copies up for sale through cdbaby.com. Brass Transit 2, I think is the code for it on that site, and it's actually selling really well, better than we expected because we thought it would mainly be venue sales after we play gigs. And then the Steely Dan book, which you alluded to, is part of the 33 1/3 classic albums series, and that one's pretty easy to find.
Now that, some time has passed from the last podcast, everybody's had their chance to digest Monkey House Headquarters. They've had their chance to digest Bright Up Brothers Songbook Volume 2, just passing through. So now they're ripe to check out Brass Transit, and I encourage everybody to do that. And I want to thank you for doing double duty here and appearing on back-to-back episodes of the podcast this way, because I've really enjoyed speaking with you about the good old 70s, and thank you for writing those books, and thank Jeff as well.
I'll pass it along to him, and listen, Dan, any old time, man, I love this. Is just fun. So I'll talk all night about this stuff.
Well, as I said, we're going to talk about Asia, and we're going to talk about the Monkey House on the horizon, so we will do this again. Well, we came in with Dickie Goodman, and we're going to go out with him as well. Instead of a shark, this one is going to be a tribute to the popularity of a large gorilla who gained a lot of attention back in the 70s. Then after that, we'll hear one more killer track from Brass Transit. This is going to be their remake of a 1971 hit by Rare Earth. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next time. So long, everybody.
We're here on Skull Island, where a 40-foot gorilla has just kidnapped Dwan, a young actress. Hey, Kong, what did you tell her?
Tonight's the night.
And what did she say to you?
You've got a cute way of talking.
When do you intend to let her go?
After loving.
Dwan, if you can hear me up there, What advice do you have for someone who was kidnapped by a 40-foot gorilla? Thank you, Juan. Juan, okay. Kong, you're going to New York to do a concert. While you're there, where are you going to take a bath? One last question before you go. What do you call that weird way you walk? We are here in New York where the stadium is filled. Kong, what do you feel like with all these people around?
Just another new kid in town.
Kong is breaking loose. He doesn't want to do the concert. Dwan, say something to him.
You don't have to be a star, baby.
He's heading for the World Trade Center. We'll have to get help to stop this monkey. Kong has reached the Trade Center. He's climbing to the top. Kong, what are you doing up there?
Writing something nasty on the wall.
We are here with Kong on top of the World Trade Center. Army helicopters are shooting at him. Kong is shouting something up at them.
Hand me down the walking cane. Hand me down my hat.
They've hit him. Kong, have you any last words to say to Dwan?
When will I hold you again?
He's starting to fall. Hey, Kong, you're on my foot. We're falling. Kong! Kong! Kong!
Don't let it all get you down, oh no. I just want to celebrate another day of living. I just want to celebrate another day of life. I put my faith in the people, but the people let me down. So I turn the other way and I carry on anyhow. That's why I'm telling you I just want to celebrate, yeah, yeah. Another day of living, yeah. I just want to celebrate another day of life. Had my hand on the dollar bill, then the dollar bill blew away. But the sun is shining down on me and it's here to stay. That's why I'm telling you I just want to celebrate, yeah, yeah. Another day of living, yeah. I just want to celebrate.